Right. Good day or good evening, depending on where you are right now. So for this video recording, we will continue on our topic with HTML. Together with the attributes, we might include some of the attributes that is commonly used and an introduction to CSS on how to use it, and finally, how can we do or create a wireframe and convert our idea into a visually and write it down in a piece of paper or in a photo editor, so that we will have a good grasp or visualization of how our design or layout of our website might look like. Okay, so for the first one, let's continue with the HTML. So before we start our HTML document, we will need to have to add important elements uh, that will uh, structurize your HTML document. And the first one is the doc type. So the doc type basically means it tells the browser what version of HTML you are going to use. In previous versions, we can use XHTML or HTML4, but those are deprecated technologies or versions. So right now, if you want to use standard web technologies, especially HTML, then you need to use HTML5. So for that, you need to add this code. So if you're using a code editor or IDE, it will most likely be easy for you to add this code. So for example, I created a folder in my desktop called test, and I have an HTML file here. So let's go ahead and edit it. So right now it's blank, but using Sublime, I can just basically do this. So it starts with a left angle bracket, and when I type HTML HT, then you'll see here it already suggested me the HTML element. So with that, we have created a simple HTML5 boilerplate. So back in our topic, so doc type is not necessarily required to use, but some browser, if you do not specify the doc type or document type, the browser will load its default document type. So if you're using Google Chrome, so it will basically just use this document type or the version or the HTML5 version. So with that, it tells the browser that we are going to use HTML5. Back in the days, around 2000s, it is very important to specify this because there are a lot of versions of HTML and HTML, so it is at the time necessary to specify this line. But for now, since most popular browsers, Windows Edge, Chrome, Firefox, uses HTML5 as a default version. But just a precaution, and for the sake of this lecture, we'll be using this doc type. Alright, the next important element, so take note, doc type is not an element, but HTML is. So HTML, it is the root element of your document. So basically, all elements should be added within the element. So if you're going to remove the other elements, so basically no other elements must be added in our, outside the HTML element. So it should be within or between the opening and closing tag. Although might, it will still work. Like for example, I'm going to add a link here. Save this and let's see. Let's open our document, the folder. So as you can see, it still works. The link still shows up in our document. But if we're going to check the developer tool or by pressing F12, you'll see that Google Chrome fix our HTML document. So what happens is the if the browser downloads our file, in our case Chrome, it will automatically fix the invalid declaration or invalid codes and make it cleaner as possible. So you can see here, the link has been transferred in the body element. Although it might seem to work, but in uh, with regards with SEO or with regards with the or in the eyes of the search engines, it is an invalid document, and it will be most likely disregard or will not be read by the search engine. Okay, so I recommend that you don't take your chances. So just add your elements inside the HTML element. So very important. The next is the body and then the head. So what comes after the HTML element should be these two elements, the head and then the body. So they serve a different purpose, as the head contains the information about your document. If you want to add more information, then you should add it in the head. So all elements that you add in the head element does not appear in our browser except for title. The rest, you will not see it in the browser or in the presentation area. So this area is what we call, or some other, including me, call this as presentation area. So as you can see here, if you did not specify the title tag, it will by default uses the file name as the uh, title tag or the content of the title tag. So let's add the some text in the title tag. So HTML and CSS. So save it, and obviously the title will change. So the title element is the only element that you will see in the browser, right? So next, the body. So the body is where our presentation is being displayed. So every element that you add here will most likely display in the browser. So as for the head, some of the contents, I'm sorry, I forgot the attributes. So attributes basically adds behavior to your element or additional information to your element. So we'll discuss some of the attributes later on. So for the head, as you can see, we already have the title, and the other one is the meta. So meta adds information about our document. So like for example here, we tell the browser on this line, we tell the browser that we are going to use the character set, which is UTF-8. So what does this mean? So it tells the browser that we are going to use the standard English characters. Everything that is in the English alphabet the characters, the small and big letters, the special characters. That is the format that we are going to use in our document. So if we're going to use Japanese, Arabic, um, Bahasa, so you might need to change the character set into its respective value. Then is the next one is the link. So the purpose of the link is it's in the name. So we are going to link an external file into our HTML document. So this will come in handy if we're going to add our CSS style later on. So for now, let's just disregard the attributes. We will discuss it in the CSS section. But basically, that's the purpose of the link element. So another one is the style. So style is another element that we can add in our head section or head element. So you just if you want to style a specific style to your elements, or if you want to include an internal CSS code, then the style is important, or what you need to use. Then next is the script. So script is if you want to add JavaScript code, then script element is what you need to add. So in between the opening and closing tag, you can add your own JavaScript. So we will discuss this more when we come to our or we are going to discuss our JavaScript topic. So these elements are example that what we can add in our head element. As you can see, it doesn't display anything, but it just add additional information to your HTML document. And as for the body, so I think we've already discussed this, that everything what you add here will be displayed in the presentation, in the browser's presentation area. So not much to be discussed here. So let's move here in the attribute. So in our HTML, you need to add the attribute in the opening tag only. And these are the elements, or I mean the uh, attributes that most elements can use. So ID is basically for identifying a specific or one element. So you can assign as a unique value to identify one element. And class is used to group your elements. So regardless of the type of elements, it doesn't matter if it's an H1, div, span, so you can group those using the class. So used to group elements, while the ID is used to identify one or unique element. And then its style attribute, if you want to add a specific style to one element, then you can use style. Like for example, we're going to add here ID. So let's say this is a main page. Then class. Let's say column 1. And also you can add another. You can also add one or more classes in one element. Let's say faculty. Then let's say CAS, then computer department. So as you can see here, I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 classes for the body element. All I need to do is to separate each class with spaces. So depending on your requirements or how you will design or program your HTML document, um, you can actually do multiple classes. So it's possible. And for the script, if you want to add a specific event for your JavaScript, then it's possible. And one of those are on click and on blur. So on click, if the element has been clicked, then you can add a JavaScript code on how it will respond if the element is clicked. Or on blur, on basically it means that if the element is focused. So let's add some examples. So just to show you, we don't need to go deeply into this topic or the JavaScript topic. So just to show you, let's say if the body element has been clicked, it will show a pop-up message. Let's say alert hello. So let's try to save it, then refresh. So if I try to click on the presentation area or in this white area, somehow, as what we have said earlier, there should be a pop-up box. But when I click on it, it doesn't work or nothing's happened. But if we're going to check the developer tool and highlight the body, we will see that uh, the body element only has this area. So from here to here, that's the area that the body has occupied. That's because it only contains this element. So this link. So that means whatever content or element the body contains, that's the only space that it's going to take. But if I'm going to click on the area where the body occupies, so that means from here to here, then let's see what will happen. There you go. So there is um, a pop-up message. So this example shows you that elements does not necessarily take a lot of space, or that it only takes depending on its content or the element it has. So that's one thing that you need to take note or remember. So far, these attributes are commonly used by most elements. So again, most, not all. Right? There are other elements that doesn't use these attributes. Okay. So far, that's for the HTML. So we don't need to dive more on this about HTML. We'll just discuss some part of it as we go along. So next we will discuss about CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. So CSS is basically the design of your website, while HTML is the structure. So think of HTML as the naked human body, and the CSS is the clothes, the shoes, the watch, or the uh, anything that you wear for the human body. So that will be CSS. So you can create internal CSS code. That means you can add it within the HTML document, or you can apply it or add it in an external file. Make sure that you use .css as the file extension. Else the browser will ignore it. So how do we add CSS codes in our document? So we add CSS code in three ways. Number one, we could add it as an external document, or we can add it using the style element, or we can add it using the style attribute. So let's try number one. So we were going to use the link elements so that we can link a certain external file. So as you can see, it has three attributes: the rel, type, and href. So in our the rel stands, it means relationship. So what's the relationship of this link? So you make sure that it is what do you call that? Correctly spelled. So style sheet. So there is no space between the style and sheet, but only one word. So if you do that, the browser will ignore it and will not load the file. So the type, so what is the type of the file? So obviously it is a text slash CSS. And href, it means that the URL path of the CSS file. So let's try to add it. So we've already created a CSS file, which is style.css. It is empty right now. So let's basically add it here. So since the HTML and CSS is in the same directory, then we can just type the name of the file like so. So this means that the browser will look for the style.css file on the same directory where our HTML document exists or located. So with this, we have successfully loaded our HTML document. So to test that, if we have successfully loaded our HTML document, we will use the developer tool to locate our file. So in the head section, look for the link, then right click, and then open in new tab. So if you see something like this or a blank, or you can see the CSS code, then that means it is working. But how about if we if the file doesn't exist, or we misspelled the file name, like for example style1. So if we're going to open it again, so you'll see something error like this. So it's file not found, so obviously. Okay, so let's do that again. Let's put it back, undo, control C, then again uh, let's try to put it here. Okay, just like that. Refresh, then you'll see here the code that we have added. Okay, so that's good. We have successfully added our CSS file. Next is, so we've already added the first way, which is using the link or external file. The second one is using the style element. So the style element, we just use the style element here. Let's say so just for an example, I'm going to add a background color in our body. So don't worry yet. I just want to show this or demonstrate if it works or not. Let's say red. So I declared here that the body element will have the red as background. So refresh. Then I have successfully set the background color of the body element. So that's the second way. We can use the style element to add our CSS code. And lastly, we can use the style attribute to add a certain property or CSS style in a specific element. So let's say style. Um, let's add a border. So don't worry about this yet. This is just for the sake of example. White. Save and refresh. So with that, we have successfully added a border in our body element using the style attribute. So next is as what other programming languages, um, CSS also has a comment feature, but unlike CSS, it only uses multiple lines. Unlike CSS, Java, it uses single line like that. So CSS only use multiple lines. So for example, multiple line, let's say file name style.css description domain style of all documents. So like so. So again, comment is very important to at least put some description or help out your fellow programmer or developer. Now next, I forgot to add it here, so CSS priority. So the first one is done, inline, internal, external, and browser default. So for this CSS priority, there are some cases that you will apply the same CSS style in the same element but different location. Like for example, you have added let me uh, okay, just to be clear. Okay, so the if you're using the link approach, then that means you are using the external CSS. If you're going to use the style element, then you're using the internal element. If you use the style attribute, then you are using the inline approach. So for the CSS priority, the number one is the important keyword. So let's first discuss the browser default. So if you did not style a specific element, then the browser will use its default value. So like for example, um, I have here refresh. I have here the body element. So I am highlighting the body element. So as you can see, we already added the border and then the background color. But if you scroll down, you will see here that the body element has the block display and the margin of 8 pixels. So we did not add this style, but it's the browser that does this. So all properties that aren't specified, the browser will take over and use its default value. So as you can see here, we have here the margin of 8 pixels, or if you're going to use in the computed attribute, you will see there lots of properties that's already been specified or been added a default value. So again, the least or the last priority is the browser default. If we have specified a certain property, then the browser default will be overwritten. So like for example here, we have here the margin, a default value for the margin which is 8 pixels. But if we're going to add, let's say, body, so don't worry about this property, margin 0, and refreshed it, as you can see here, the default value has been crossed out or strike through. So this means this property has been taken over or overwritten by the uh, CSS property in the style file. So take note, the style is an example of external CSS. So that means the external has the highest priority than the browser default. So that means the browser default will be taken over by the external property. The next highest priority is the internal. So internal, we use the um, style element. So what if we have another margin property for the body element? So take note, we already have a margin for the body in the external file. But let's see what will happen if we're going to add another property, margin, let's say 20 pixels for the body element. So let's try to refresh our page. Now this time, the body, as you can see here, there are spaces around the body element. That is because the we have added a CSS style in the internal property or internal CSS. So as you can see here, we have the margin from the style file, as you can see here, has been taken over by the margin in the style element. So if you click this, it will point you or scroll you to the actual code. So this is where the uh, overridden overwritten took over. So that's how very helpful the developer tool is. Okay. So again, you will trace it by using the developer tool. So the first one is the browser default. It was uh, uh, crash out because we add another margin, but it was in the external file or external style sheet. But then again, we added margin which is 20 pixels using the style element that can be found here. So very helpful. So next is we use the next priority is the inline or the style attribute. So if we're going to add another margin, let's say margin 100 pixels. So obviously, since the inline has the highest priority than the internal, so that means the browser will choose the inline CSS. As what we have specified here, the body element will have the margin of 100 pixels. So if we're going to refresh this, you will see there is a lot of space right now. And if we're going to check the style tab right here, you will see that the style element here has been crossed out. So the margin has been crossed out. That is because another priority has taken over, which is the uh, uh, in in inline property or the style attribute. Then lastly, we have here the important uh, value. So what it does, it won't use so it won't use so depending on so the important is very special. If we're going to add this in the property, it doesn't care which location it is located. So for example, we're going to add the important keyword or property in the external. So let's add here exclamation, then important. So take note, it's in the external style sheet. So external is the fourth priority. But if you check again in the document, the body has a style attribute that has the margin of 100 pixels. So it's an inline property. So inline CSS. So if you check again, inline has the second most priority. But this time we added an important property in the external. So let's see what will happen. So as you can see here, the body has now a zero margin. So as you can see here, if you check the style.css file, now the body or the styled CSS, the value did not cross out. And on the attribute, the style attribute, the margin 100 pixel has been crossed out. So the important, if you add the important keyword, it will disregard the priority. So it doesn't matter if it's in the external or internal, as long as you have the value important. Okay, so that's how the CSS priority works. The next is the CSS selectors. So there are a lot of CSS selectors we can find or available, but I've chosen the most common and well used selectors. So selectors basically the element that you want to style. It can be an H1 element, all div element, it can be a selected element, and so on. So first, we can use element selector if we want to style a certain element by its name. So let's say we want to style all H1. So then that means we are going to use H1 as the selector. So in our external style sheet, the format or the syntax is selector, curly braces, and then property and value, like this. So selector is changeable. So depending on the type of selector that we are going to use, this will change. And you can add one or more property as long as you separate it by semicolon. So separate each property by semicolon. And this property value will change depending on what property or element we are going to use. So in the example here, we have H1. So let's say we have here an H1. Now, if you want to style this specific element, which is the H1, then we can use the name of the element as the selector. So H1. So take note the name element selector. So you are referring to the name of the element as the selector. So property format. So property colon value and then semicolon. So let's say let's use the property color, and then the value is pink, or no, um, green. So we're not gonna use pink because it's already red. So with that, let's save, then refresh. So there you have it. The H1 element has the color green. So that's how you can specify or style a certain or group of elements using selector. So take note, if we are going to use the element selector, then you are referring to all element. So in this case, if we add the H1 selector here, so that means all H1 will have the color green. So let's try to change those. Let's say dog, cat, mouse. So let's refresh that. As you can see, all H1 element has the property of color, and the value is green. The next is the ID selector. So what if you want to style unique or specific or one element only? So obviously we were going to use the ID selector using the ID attribute. So meaning if we have an element with the ID divisions here, in the CSS selector we add the number sign or hashtag or sharp, then followed with the value of the ID. So let's say this H1 that contains the dog word, let's add an ID attribute. Let's say dog, like that. So we can apply a CSS style using the ID selector by adding the number sign and then the value of the ID attribute. So dog. So let's try to distinguish it or make it different than the others. So let's make it color um, white. So let's save. There you have it. So we have successfully changed the uh, color property of one of the H1 element that contains the ID attribute. So just to give you an idea, you can use actually multiple ID on I mean you can use one ID to on multiple element. It will still work like that. So as you can see here, the dog and then the mouse has the ID dog. But later on in our JavaScript, it will give you an error if it has an ID with the same value. So make sure that you do not duplicate the value for the ID. Let's say mouse. So that fixed it. The next is the class selector. So class selector is if we need to group certain elements regardless of its type, as long as it has the same class attribute value. So in this example, we have an element that has the class and the value is selector. If we're going to use it as a class selector, then we need to add a dot or period character, then followed with the value of the class attribute. So like so. Let's say add a class. Let's say titles, paragraph, say a quick round fox jumps over lazy dog. And let's add another class, which is titles. It doesn't make sense. So this is a paragraph. So just for the sake of example. So regardless of the type of the element, in our case here the h1 and then paragraph, we group them by using the class attribute. So with that, we can use the class selector by adding a period or dot and then the value of the class, which is titles. Let's add a underline. So text decoration underline. So for now, don't mind these properties. So we might discuss this later on. So this is just to show you how the selectors work. Take note, the h1 and then the paragraph has the titles class. So if you're going to refresh this, then you'll see that the hello world that contains the titles as the class, and then the last or the paragraph that has the titles class has the underline property. So that's how the class selectors work. So it doesn't matter what type of um, element they are, as long as they have the same um, class value, then you can group them. And lastly, we have here the wildcard. So basically all element. So usually use this in web development to reset. Use to reset browser default properties. So if you want to later on, if you want to accurately measure your element, especially when you try to lay out your design, then you might want to reset the um, properties of the browser default. As again, I've already mentioned it earlier that all elements has its own default property. Like earlier in the body, if you do not specify the margin property, then the browser will take over and use its default value. So we usually use this CSS reset. So CSS reset. So for the CSS reset, we usually uh, clear out the margin, the padding, and then the border. So this makes all element doesn't will not have the margin, padding, and border property. So if we do this, all of all of our elements doesn't have the margin and padding. So this is very good. If you want to, we have this term pixel perfect. If you want your design to be pixel perfect, then you need to reset your padding, margin, and border. And then after that, you can specify your own uh, default values for the margin, padding, and border. So CSS reset. Okay. Then after that, the box model. So the box model is the format that most element uses. So when I say most element, I am referring to the elements that you can add in the body element. So that excludes the link, the style, the script, the meta, and the title. So those element doesn't have a box model, or more or less, no, they don't have those. So in the box model, in this red or maroon box here, this is your content. And after your content, you have the padding. And after the padding, you have the border. And lastly, the margin. So where can we see this? So again, in the developer tool, let's check or select the body element. Once you click it, then go to the styles tab and scroll down at the very bottom. Then you'll see the box model of your element, in our case the body. So it shows you here that the margin has the color orange, and the border um, is this yellow. I'm sorry. So border has, it represents the yellow color, and then the padding represents the green color. And with that is the content. So it shows you the width, which is 1036, and then the height is 184 for our body element. Okay, so right now it doesn't show you, uh, if you hover in the center, you only see a blue, the body has the blue background. That is because that's the only space that we have set, since we have put the margin border padding to 0, but rather the border is to 1. But most element has the, we have reset the margin border and padding. Okay, so let's try to add margin to our body element. So let's say 20 pixels. Refresh it. As you can see, there is space around the body element. So if we check our um, box model, so first we need to click on the body element and go to the box model. If we hover on the margin, you will see here that there is also an orange square, a rectangle that wraps around the body. So that means that's where the margin occupies. So that's the area where our margin, or the space of our margin, can be found. Then border, let's add a border. Border, let's say 5 pixels. Um, so don't worry about the border, we will discuss it. So refresh, so it doesn't uh, reflect our changes since we have already a border in our style attribute. So for us to take over the priorities, we are going to add the important keyword. So important. Then refresh. Then we have here the yellow border. So back at the box model, if we hover on the border, you will see. Oh no. Let's do let's say green. Refresh. So if we hover on our border, you will see here the yellow color here. So our border represent the yellow color here. So that means this is where our border can be found. And lastly, for our padding, let's add a padding. Padding, say 20 pixels. Fresh. Then we, as you can see here, there's a space between the border and our content. So let's check the box model. So the padding, there you go. There you have it. The padding now has this green colored that wraps around here. So that means that's where our padding occupies. So later on, if you're going to lay out your design, you might wonder why your element doesn't behave or look as what you're expected. So you might want to check the border, the box model to see how the spaces occupies. So this will be a really big help for you to debug your design by checking the box model. So these are the properties. So for the margins, it's basically the space after your border. By using the margin property, then you can add a space that wraps around your border or your element. So there are several four combinations for the value that you can add. So the first one, if you are going to add one value for margin, so that means, uh, for example, here we have 10 pixels. So that means all sides have 10 pixels spaces. So same here in our example, we specified that our margin for the body has 20 pixels. So that means all sides will have 20 pixels. So as you can see here, the top side has the 20 pixels. The right, bottom, and left has the 20 pixels as well. So if you want to use two values, like this one, 10 pixels space 5 pixels. So that means um, the 10 pixels will go to the top and bottom, while the 5 pixels or the second value will go to the left and right. So let's try that. So instead of 20, then we will use the 10 space 5. So two values. So if we're going to refresh it and check the box model, you will see that on the top and bottom is 10 pixels, while the left and right has 5 pixels. Next, if we're going to use three values, so it means that the first value will go to the top, the second value will go to both left and right, and the third value will go to the bottom. So let's use that. So instead of this, let's replace it. And as you can see, it has three values. So let's check. So again, 15, 10, and 5. So 15 will go to the top, and the 10 or the second value will go to the left and right. So it was 10. And the third value is 5 pixels, which will go to the bottom side. And lastly, if we're going to add four values, that means you will specify each sides with a specific value. So if the first value will go to the top, the second value will go to the right, the third value will go to the left, and the fourth value will go to the bottom. So let's try that. Save. Then top is 20, right is 15, bottom is 10, and 5 is right. Alright. So if you want only to apply specific sides, so you can do margin top or individual properties, and each of these individual properties will only have one value. So you can't do 2 to 4 values, but only one. So let's try margin top, and let's use it 100 pixels. Okay, it doesn't look right. Okay, margin top. Okay, let me remove this. So it seems that the since we only applied the top margin for the body for 100 pixels, we forgot to we did not realize that it has another property, which is margin, and has one value. So this means all sides of the element. But in our case here, we only specified that the top, so basically the left, bottom, and right took over because we only specified here the top. So let's make it a bit distinguishable. So let's say 500 pixels. So take note, we have here another margin. So top, right, and bottom is supposed to be 100 pixels. But in our body here, in our external file, we specified only the top margin. So refresh and then check our, as you can see here, if we highlight the element, you will see the difference. So for our external file, we added the top margin to be 500 pixels, and then the left and right is 100 pixels. Alright, so hopefully you understood why it happened. So again, we only specified the top margin, while on the inline style we specified all sides. So, but since we added the important keyword or value, then the margin top took over and overrides the top margin. Okay, so again, you can specify individual sides. So next is the padding. So it's the same as margin when it comes to the values. So if you're going to specify one value, then that means it's all sides. And you can also specify the specific sides only, so if you want that. But the main difference is the padding is affected by the background or image. So if you're going to apply a background color or an image, then the padding will be affected like this. So padding, let's say, so right now we have a 20 pixels of padding for our body. So if we're going to check here, on this area is our padding. Um, let's say, okay, just to be, okay, so let's try to change different element since it's already been overused as an example. So how about we use this, the element, h1 element with the ID mouse. Say sharp mouse, and let's add a padding of 20 pixels, margin of 30 pixels, and then the background color, let's say gray. So there are you can specify a color name or a hex value or an RGB for the color. So we will just discuss it on other topics. So let's see what will our element look like. Okay, so let's analyze it. So for our H1 element here, the orange represents the margin, while the green represents the padding. So focus your eyes here on the green area. So as you can see, we applied a gray background color for our H1 element here. as you can see, the padding has the background color, but if you check on this area, it doesn't have the background color gray. So that's the main difference for our uh, padding and margin. So let's say you can say that padding is part of the content of the element. So that's why it was affected by the background color or image, because padding is part of the content. So but unlike the margin, it is not part of the content, so it's not affected by the background color. Alright, so next is the border. So border, for the border element here, you can add three values here. So these three values uh, doesn't need to be in this order. You can sometimes put the border thickness on the first value. It doesn't matter. The browser will know how it should apply the style. So in our those are three values. So first one, so the border thickness. So how thick is our border? So it should be here. So 1 pixels. So for the solid here, it represents the border style. So aside from solid, you can use dash, dotted, inset, and outset. And of course, for the border color, so you can specify color name, hex, or RGB. So for borders, it is used for all sides. So if you're going to specify these, if we're going to use the border property, then that means you are applying it on all sides. But if you want to use specific side, then instead of border, then you can use border dash top, border dash left, border dash bottom. Okay, so let's try to apply it. So in our mouse, let's add a border. Let's say 4 pixels, dash, and let's say sharp. Okay, so so let's use a hex value. So a hex value should start with a number sign and follow with the 6 hex character value. So our hex, again, for those who do not know, the hex is between 0 to 9, A to F. So that means A is 11 and F is 15. So B is 12, C is 13 until 15. So that's how our hex values are. So let's try it. So it turns out I was just using random values. It turns out this A91FFA is purple. And we use the dash as the style of the border and 4 pixel as the thickness. Or we can use RGB for the value or for the color. RGB. So 255, 255, 255. So 255, the higher the value, the lighter the color. So let's try that. So this should be white. There you go. So it's white. But we're going to use 0, 0 0, that means it's black. So the maximum value for the RGB, the minimum value is 0, and then the max is 255. So you can play on it or use Photoshop or edit or other editors to specify the RGB value. Let's say 25, 150. So let's see what color it is. Okay, it's gonna look like green. So using the developer tool, you can switch the colors, the RGB colors. Um, a bit of cyan. Okay, so with this, you can. It, it also helps you to create RGB colors. So let's overwrite this and use the value that we use in the developer tool. Alright, so that's good, that's good. So if we're going to specify only, let's say, border top, so instead of using border, then you add top. So refresh, then you'll see that there is a border on top of the element. So depending on your creativity, you can use it on however you want it. Then lastly, the wireframe. So we can use a wireframe to visualize our ideas on how our design may look like. So there are a lot of tools on using wireframe, and one of them is Adobe XD. Another one is Sketch. So try to Google these tools. But for now, let's just use the old school approach. So we are going to draw. So for our let's say we are going to design our wireframe. So let's say oops, let's say our website will have this image. So in in a wireframe, images represents with a box and with an X inside it. So depending on how long it is, that's how the X will extend. Let's say a huge font here. Let's say this is the title of the website. Let's say awesome. All right. It doesn't look much, but for the sake of example, all right. All right. Let's say that's our logo. All right. So I know you can do better. So let's say this is our, let's say our heading or the title of our website. And next is our, let's say our links. Let's say home. Okay, it's been a while I'm using my pen tablet, so I'm a bit shaky. So home, let's say about, um, contact us. And let's say this website is, let's say it's about selling t-shirts, so designs. All right. So as for our link, let's add an underline. All right. So that's the links for our website, so user can easily navigate on our website. Now next, let's try to use a huge image here. Nowadays they call it as hero. And again for the image, yes, you can extend the X depending on how long or big your image is. So this tells that we need to apply an image here, and maybe text here for columns of text. So I think this might be some of the text that refers to our website. You might say this could be a mission or form. Let's see. So sign up, or probably a mailing list for so that our customer will have an update on our website. So mailing list, you just need to have their email and name so that we can properly call them out. And let's say links here. So link. Oops. Okay. Let's. Okay. So I might change the setting of my tablet since it's so very sensitive. Oops. Okay. So this is the link. All right. Link. Divider. Then link. Divider. Then link. So let's say this is how our home page will look like. So this, let's say, let's add here home page. So when you design your wireframe, and if you're going to convert it in an HTML document, make sure you can distinguish, or you can sectionize your design. So this means that we're going to identify each section, their name, and then their purpose. So let's use a red ink here. So let's say on this area, so this is just an imaginary line, so it's not part of your design. So this is your heading. Oh my god, no. So heading, and on this area is your navigation. Oh my god. Oops. On our navigation, and this will be our hero. So a wireframe doesn't need to be very perfect. Again, it's just a rough sketch. So I'm not saying that anyway, sorry. So this will be our hero. And this will be our newsletter. Ah, newsletter. And then this will be the sitemap. So sitemap basically contains all of the links in your website. So sitemaps are very helpful for search engines. So now we have identify our sections. So we have here the heading, navigation, hero, newsletter, and sitemaps. Now next part of the process is should be, oh by the way, this process is just based on my experience and observation, or so you may not see this on other tutorials, but this is just on how I do website designs. So the next is we should determine our subsections. So we have here the sections. Now we have to determine our subsections. So these are our subsections. So in our heading, we have two sections or subsections, the logo and then the titles. And for the navigation, we have the subsection, so these individual links is our subsections. So you can name this as logo, uh, site title, and so on. So you can like this. You can determine the subsection, this one, and these ones. So you've already determined the section and then the subsection. So in this way, it will be much easier for you to structurize your HTML. You can determine the classes, the ID, you can determine the groups of your elements, and later on it will be easy for you to apply CSS or design your layout. So for now, let's just end it here, and we will continue on how we are going to convert these design into an actual HTML and CSS web page. All right. So for your activity, forgot to add here activity 3. Create 3 sitemaps. Um, um, Add a name and description. So the name is, for my example here, it's the home page, and then the description is, let's say this is the home page. This is where all of my visitors comes first, something like that, just to describe your wireframe. And the next, determine the sections, then determine the subsections. So you need to submit this in an image format to our VLA. Then next time, we are going to, after you have added the sitemaps, for the next activity, you will create the um, designated HTML error that created. So that's and hopefully uh, have a great day. So thank you very much.